prices have gone up 28% in the past 5 years. That is honestly as insane as it sounds. And the one thing that people can't stop talking about is the price of eggs. A lot of people think that the price of eggs is responsible for the winner of the presidential election. But what else can we... Well, first of all, is there a good swap for eggs?
It depends on how you're using them. If you want to make scrambled eggs, you could make a tofu scramble. You could, but I'm not sure that's really what you had in mind when you wanted scrambled eggs. If you're using eggs in a recipe, like as a binder for meatloaf or in baking, there are swaps you can do. But yes, eggs are one of those things that are really hard to find a swap for. I do agree with you.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me today on Her Money. I'm Jean Chatzky, and I want to know if you, like me, have ever found yourself running frantically to the grocery store because you are missing one ingredient. One. But you need it desperately for whatever you are trying to make for dinner. Maybe it is thyme, maybe it's bay leaves. Often in my house, it's buttermilk. I could go on, but then you use that thing one time and watch as it slowly goes bad in the back of your fridge. Look, I have done this more times than I could count, and with food prices continuing to rise, it just feels worse every single time, which is just one of the reasons that I am so excited to talk to Ali Slagle today. She is the queen of fast and flexible recipes and using fewer ingredients in more ways. That is straight out of the bio of her incredible Substack, which is called 40 Ingredients Forever. Ali is also a New York Times contributor. She is the author of the James Beard Award-nominated cookbook, I Dream of Dinner So You Don't Have To. Probably the cookbook that I have given as a gift more than any other. Ali, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
The premise of your Substack, 40 Ingredients Forever, is, well, it's right in the title, right? So we don't have to go through the entire supermarket or even the entire list of 40. What are the few things, 5 to 10, that you think everybody must have in their kitchen at all times if they want to have a prayer of getting dinner on the table?
Well, the true answer is I think you should start with the food you really want to eat. If there's food in your house that you really want to eat, you're probably going to eat it. So for me, that's chickpeas, pasta, eggs, garlic, lemon, and oil. I think I could live for a really long time with just those ingredients.
Wow, chickpeas is a really interesting one on the list. I have all the rest, and I do have chickpeas in the house, but I rarely reach for them. Maybe we can talk about that. Food prices have gone up 28% in the past 5 years. That is honestly as insane as it sounds. And the one thing that people can't stop talking about is the price of eggs. A lot of people think that the price of eggs is responsible for the winner of the presidential election. Eggs are on your list of ingredients. I always have eggs in my fridge. I love breakfast for dinner. I don't think there's a swap for eggs. First of all, is there a good swap for eggs?
It depends on how you're using them. If you want to make scrambled eggs, you could make a tofu scramble. You could. I'm not sure that's really what you had in mind when you wanted scrambled eggs. If you're using eggs in a recipe as a binder for meatloaf or in baking, there are swaps you can do. But yes, eggs are one of those things that are really hard to find a swap for. I do agree with you.
What about the other must-have ingredients? Are there things that we should get used to thinking of as fungible in the grocery store? When you listed the must-have ingredients, could chickpeas be cannellini beans, be turkey? Could oil be something else? What's the key to getting yourself comfortable with swapping things in and out?
So my whole goal with 40 ingredients forever is not for everyone to go out and buy these 40 exact ingredients. My goal is for them to see what is possible with kind of a capsule collection of ingredients. And one of the posts that I wrote for the Substack shows kind of a recipe that I would never make. It was a chef's recipe that had so many ingredients and had so many steps. And I went through and I explained what each ingredient is doing in that recipe. So let's say lemon. They're fruity and they're also acidic. What else can do both of those things? So I basically went through and explained what each ingredient is doing in a recipe and then what swaps I could make based on my 40 ingredients. And the whole point of that was to show that everything kind of is fungible at a certain point. Everything you could probably, if you have a well-stocked kitchen, you could probably make do.
How did you get to this point in your life? How did you grow up around food? How did you become a cook? How did you start to write recipes?
You know, I've never worked in kitchens. I didn't go to cooking school, but I had a mom who would cook all of my meals. And it was just watching her. She didn't follow recipes. She just kind of moved through the kitchen, chopping, sautéing, seeing what looked good in her fridge. And that's really where I take inspiration, is just seeing what you have and making something that you want to eat. So I watched her a lot, and then I worked at a book publisher where I kind of learned the structure of a recipe and what you need to express in a recipe so that someone could make the food that you're trying to make.
When you hear people say, I eat out so much because I can't cook. It's just too hard. I'm bad at it. Doesn't come naturally to me. Every time I go to the grocery store, I come home with stuff I don't need. What's your reaction to all of those excuses? Because we know they're all excuses.
They are excuses. The tricky thing about cooking is there are so many parts of cooking. There's the deciding what to eat. There's the grocery shopping. There's the prepping, then the cooking, then the cleaning, and then the eating. So there are many moments where you can make a decision of how that step works best for you. So when people say, I don't like cooking, I ask them, what do you not like about cooking? Because if you don't like the splatter you have to clean up after you sear a chicken breast, like, make a soup. There's no cleanup to that. Or if things feel too hurried for you, if you're making a stir fry or something, throw something in the oven and walk away and go do something else. So I think it's really about trying a lot of different ways of cooking and seeing what works well for you. And then just doing that in as many ways as you can find.
I think that is such a good point. I realized a long time ago that the thing that I don't like about cooking is deciding what's for dinner. And so I don't decide. My husband decides. And this has just been our deal. He can't cook a thing. I mean, he probably could if he tried. He just doesn't try. But I never have to decide what's for dinner, which for me is such a gift. I mean, he does also sometimes do the shopping, or I'll do it if it's more convenient. That doesn't bother me. But just this pressure to figure out what to put on the table, especially during the pandemic, I couldn't take it anymore. I was so sick of my own food. And that's when we really started relying so heavily on the recipes in the New York Times, including many of yours. That's when he just started sending me recipes out of the Times and I would make them. And it took that really heavy part of the equation out of it for me. He also cleans, which is nice. He doesn't load a dishwasher the way that I want him to, but I have learned to shut up about that. Which other parts of the cooking process bother people the most, do you think?
I think you hit on a really big one, which is the decision-making part of it, which is the, what am I going to make for dinner? And I think if you go online, it can be really overwhelming. And what I would recommend and what I do is I look in my fridge and I see what is going to go bad first. So that could be some dill. It could be as simple as some dill that I should probably use, and I start from there. So I always work to use what I already have and what could go bad the quickest. So I'll have some dill, and then maybe I have a protein in the freezer that I could defrost. So I start to kind of triangulate and see what will go bad the quickest and then what I want to eat.
Are there things that you, in addition to your top 5, are there things that you always keep in the freezer, for example, so that you know you can pull out a meal. I've watched you do this trick with your newsletter where you ask people what they have and then you sort of create dinner around them. What are you pulling from? Are you pulling an acid and a protein and a veg? Like, how are you thinking about this puzzle?
I always want to have a vegetable because I just feel better when I eat vegetables. I think protein is good to have, maybe not essential, but it really depends on you. I think a lot about texture. I think texture is one of those things that really is important to enjoying the food you're eating. Sometimes you want just soft bite after soft bite, like in a lentil soup or something like that. But sometimes you want the contrast of a soft bean with a crispy skinned fish. So I'm thinking about all of those things. And I realize that as I'm saying this is like a cook talking. This is someone who really like dreams in food. And this might be hard for a lot of people to put together on their own. But I think if you start with a recipe that looks good to you and you learn how to adapt it to what you need, so thinking about what each ingredient is doing and then simplifying it from there, I think you'll find that cooking might be more enjoyable.
In preparation for this show, you asked for a list of the stuff that I keep in the kitchen so that we could play your game, which you call Show Me Your Forevers, I'll Make You Dinner. And granted, I think my listeners know I'm a pretty frequent cook. I like to cook more than I like to go out. And I do have a pretty large list of things on hand. I always have chicken thighs, which I like so much more than the other parts of the chicken. I always have some frozen shrimp. I usually have salad stuff and lemon and garlic and potatoes and some canned stuff. I always have Rao's, right? When I go to Costco, Rao's is one of the very first things that I throw in my cart. Rao's and really big jars of Grey Poupon. I have a little cheese, usually Parm or feta because it's not too hard on my stomach, and diced tomatoes, some pasta, different shapes. Sometimes I make them together. What would you do with that?
First of all, I love your list of ingredients. I would say if someone, to your question of how do you stock your kitchen, this is a great example of hitting all the categories of things. So you have frozen proteins in the freezer, so they won't go bad. You don't have pressure to eat them before they go to waste. I agree with you about chicken thighs. I think they're much more versatile. They're harder to overcook. I think you'll just enjoy eating them a lot more than a boneless chicken breast. You have fresh stuff, but not too many, so there's not a ton of pressure for it to go bad. You have really assertive seasonings like lemon and garlic, and then you have things in the pantry that can be the base of a dinner, like canned beans or like rice. And then you have some accompaniments that are already like really flavorful from the jar, so you have less to do. I'm also a Ralph's Costco buyer, so we really are on the same page about that. Chicken broth too, parm and feta. So for the sake of showing how to be flexible in a recipe, I thought I would mention a recipe that I wrote on my Substack, which is called Crispy Lamb and Lemon Rice, and make it with your ingredients. So you can do it with ground turkey, you can add garlic, you can skip the shallot. So what you do is you sear the turkey, add some garlic, add chicken broth, the zest and juice of a lemon, and some rice. So then you cover it and boil it. And what happens is the turkey won't dry out because you're cooking it in liquid, but it still has flavor because you're browning it from the skillet. And then the lemon is infusing the rice, so it's really flavorful from the start. And then what you can do is once the rice is cooked, you can just eat it right from there. Or you can add a little oil and sear the bottom of the rice, kind of like tahdig or the bottom of a bibimbap at a Korean restaurant. So you have the texture of the crispy rice and then kind of the nicely steamed rice on top. And then if you want a vegetable, add some cucumbers or a green vegetable.
That sounds amazing. If you were going to sear the rice, you take it out of the pan, put the oil in, and then put it back in, or you mush it around?
You can just drizzle it around the edges of the rice, and the oil will kind of dribble down underneath the rice and we'll sear it. I learned the method from Samin Nasrat. She has a really great tahdig recipe that is perfect, but this is kind of a simpler version of that.
You put a lid on it?
You put a lid on it when you're cooking the rice, but when you're searing the rice, you just let it sizzle.
Okay. And how long does it have to stay there? I don't want to ruin this beautiful dinner.
The rice takes about 17 minutes, and then the searing takes about 5. You can just peek under and see if it's golden, and that's it.
It sounds amazing. Your cookbook promises strictly 45-minute, 10 ingredient meals, although to your credit, you usually only use 5 to 8. What's the most popular recipe that your readers turn to again and again?
The first one that comes to mind is the one pot chicken piccata with orzo. You cook boneless, skinless chicken thighs, cubes of it, brown it, and then you add aromatics like garlic and capers, and you cook the orzo right with the boneless thighs in chicken broth. I mean, it's actually very similar to that crispy rice I just mentioned to you.
It sounds great. What's your favorite in the book?
That's a really hard question. The first thing that came to mind, maybe because it's so blistering cold right now, is the gochujang gravy. The idea is that it's a meat sauce, but it takes less time and it requires fewer ingredients because you use this fermented Korean chili paste to bring all of the flavor really quickly.
The recipe from the Times of yours that I find myself going back to again and again is the Greek chicken, which is just delicious. When we talk about things going bad in the book, you talk about making pantry lurkers and produce on its last legs as much of the main star of the recipe as farmers market celebrities. What are the things that we should buy more of, and what are the things that we should buy less of, or maybe not at all? I mean, when we are thinking about our grocery budget in this era where things have just gone up and up and up, and we hear that oft-cited statistic about food waste. First of all, the food waste stat with people who are hungry just bothers me every time I hear it. But it also, if you were raised by parents who grew up in the Depression like mine did, you don't like to throw away food. You eat your leftovers and you enjoy them. What do you think we overdo it on and underdo it on?
It really depends on the person, I think. What might be helpful for people is to spend a week or a couple weeks writing down everything they're really eating and seeing what trends there are, what they actually eat really often, and buying more of that, and maybe then looking around their pantry and seeing what they're not using, because I think it really depends on what you actually will end up eating.
Okay, you're speaking my language. I don't think that you know it, but we are big trackers here. Mm-hmm. When we're trying to help somebody get their finances straight, we go through a backwards budgeting process. It's what we do in our Finance Fix coaching classes, because if you know where your money is going, then you can make changes about where you want your money to actually go. And this is, I think, very much the same concept. What foods do you suspect that people will find they're buying that they shouldn't be buying?
They're probably buying a lot of snacks. And then they're probably buying a lot of takeout. And then when you think about what you would save just by cooking at home, I think it's an easy way to save a buck.
It is, although for all of those reasons we were talking about before, people get nervous. They just get scared. For non-cooks or reluctant cooks or cooks who believe they can't cook, how do you get them started?
I would start really small. I would start with something you really want to eat. What was the thing that you grew up eating that you really love? Maybe it's Kraft mac and cheese, but opening that box is cooking. You did something. You put a pot on the stove and you did that. And then maybe you might think about how to make it spicy because you like spice. I think it's just really, really baby steps. I think, too, it's starting with recipes that are really simple. You should be able to read the recipe through and understand every step and that you feel like you can do it. So it's really about finding the recipe writers that kind of speak to you in that way.
Besides your own recipes, whose do you turn to?
I think Sola Alwali is really wonderful. She has beginner recipes in her book Start Here, but she also has more complicated recipes, but she outlines which are easy and which are complicated. I think either way, she's such a clear recipe writer that you feel like you can do anything.
Yeah, we love Sola. She was on the podcast about 6 months ago when her book came out, and it was a treat. You shared a photo of the Brooklyn kitchen where you spent 6 years testing recipes for the New York Times and for your book. Why do you think people feel that they need a big fancy kitchen before they can really get started cooking?
That's a good question. You know, the thing about big kitchens is they actually don't make any sense to me because they're too spread out. You have to run around too much. I love cooking in a small space because it's more efficient if you think about restaurant kitchens. They're just really well laid out and you have everything that you need within arm's reach. So I think it's just a matter of perspective. I prefer to cook in a small space where I have everything I need really close at hand.
And what are the appliances that you think people actually need versus the ones that they buy?
So after I lived in that Brooklyn kitchen, my partner and I remodeled a camper van and we drove around the country for 6 months. So we built out a little kitchen in the back. So similar to the grocery eating tracking, I had to track what appliances I used most often. So anytime I would use something in my Brooklyn apartment, I would put it in a box and then that would make it into the camper van. And really what made it in was a large skillet, a good knife, a cutting board, a spoon. I think you can kind of do a lot with just that.
Yeah, absolutely. Although please don't ask me to give up my KitchenAid mixer because I really don't use my Cuisinart. I use my Cuisinart twice a year at the Jewish holidays. I use it to make potato kugel and I use it to make potato latkes, and otherwise I don't use it. And I probably could do those things by hand, but I really like my KitchenAid mixer.
For a long time, I didn't have a blender, a food processor, or a mixer. The cookbook doesn't use any of those gadgets.
Good to know. We don't have to spend up for that, just like my Mr. Coffee maker that seems to do the trick every single day. Again, we're a money show. We talk about food because when I ask people or when I look at people's budgets to find the places where money is just flowing through their fingers and they don't know, it's pretty much always food. And even if it's not just food, food is almost always on the list. Besides just cook, what are your best ideas for saving money at the grocery store or saving money on our food budget in general?
You know, something I've been thinking about recently, which maybe isn't a very clear way to save money on your food, but really is to share the responsibility of making dinner by having people over for dinner some nights and then being invited to other people's houses for other nights. Where I live, we basically eat at other people's houses 2 or 3 nights a week, and it's not a dinner party. It's really just whatever people are cooking that night. They just invite a couple people over, and then you don't have to cook that night. You don't have to do dishes that night, and you get to eat with other people. And I think if you get stressed out about cooking or the thought of doing it every single night, breaking it up with your friends is a really nice way to make it enjoyable.
I love that idea for a couple of reasons. I was thinking in answering a reader question recently about recipe quantities and portion sizes. And my 2 kids have not lived at home for quite some time, but I still often cook as much as I would if there were 4 of us rather than knowing that there are just 2 of us. I do it by habit. I do it because that's sort of what the recipe demands. Often I'll freeze half and know that we have another dinner in the freezer. But what you just said reminds me of our COVID pod. My next door neighbors, we would have dinner with them a couple of nights a week at least. We weren't really seeing other people, but she would cook or I would cook or he would cook, not my husband. And it spread the load, but it also, we really were not shopping for much more food. We were just sharing it.
It doesn't feel like, it feels like such a pleasure to do, and it's also just easier. So I don't know why you wouldn't do it.
This conversation has been delightful. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for talking with me. We're going to have a mailbag coming up later in the week where you answer questions from our listeners, which is fantastic. What are we looking for from you next? Where would you like people to go to find more of you?
I think my Substack is a really fun place to be if you like simple recipes with a lot of swaps, a lot of substitution ideas so that you can use what you have. The Substack is called 40 Ingredients Forever.
Ali Slagle, thanks so much.
Thank you.